scrutiny and skepticism against Joe Biden has skyrocketed since his dismal debate showing. Democratic politicians, donors, media, and pundits alike are calling for him to bow out. So, should Biden stay the course?
Our next guest has correctly predicted 9 out of the 10 last elections based on a system that he's come up with, examining the 13 keys necessary to win the White House. Joining us now to talk more in depth on these keys is Allan Lichtman himself. Welcome, Allan, to Rising. Thanks for joining us. Why don't you give our viewers first a little bit of a rundown of exactly how your system works in terms of predicting who will win in November?
My system is fundamentally different from the polls. Polls are snapshots, not predictors. They are abused as predictors. My system is fundamentally different from the pundits, who have no scientific basis for their opinions and are often wrong. My 13 keys to the White House gauges how American presidential elections really work as votes up or down on the strength and performance of the White House party. And that's what the 13 keys measure. They look at things like midterm election results, incumbency, third parties, internal party contests, long and short-term economy, social unrest, scandal, policy change, foreign military policy, successes and failures, and only 2 keys have anything to do with the candidates. And they're very high threshold keys, assessing whether the incumbent and challenging party candidates are those once-in-a-generation inspirational candidates like Franklin Roosevelt or Ronald Reagan. And the way this system works is if 6 or more of the 13 keys go against the party holding the White House, they're predicted losers. Any 6. It's a totally nonlinear, unweighted system. Fewer than 6 negative keys, the party holding the White House is a predicted winner. And by the way, I would say I predicted 10 of 10 because 2000 was a stolen election. Al Gore should have won Florida going away based on the intention of the voters, as I proved in my report to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, which you can still consult. It's on their website.
So it sounds like this sort of predictive model, if you will, is one that operates with an output of either Democrat or Republican victory, that either a candidate from the 2 major parties gets in office. How does this election measure up, given that we have a pretty viable third-party candidate, RFK Jr., and then we have Jill Stein and Cornel West getting about 6% of the vote as well?
Yes, third parties figure into my keys to the White House. They're one of my factors, and they count against the White House party because they are a sign of discontent with governing. But not every third party or independent campaign would count. In developing my system, I went all the way back to the horse and buggy days of politics, the election of Abe Lincoln in 1860, and prospectively, my system has worked since I predicted Ronald Reagan's reelection in April 1982, nearly 3 years ahead of time, when the nation was in the midst of the worst recession at that point since the Great Depression, and Reagan's approval ratings were 43%. So you see how I can very much go against the polls. And typically what I've found, a third party really counts if it gets at least 5% of the popular vote. But I don't know that, obviously, in advance. So I have the Lichtman rule of halves because of the Lichtman wasted vote syndrome. I love you, RFK Jr., but you can't win, so I'm not going to vote for you. So it's the only time I use polls because I have to. I count third party against the White House party if the candidate stabilizes at least at 10% in the polls.
What do you think Joe Biden should do at this point with cratering support after his debate performance and a lot of tension within his own party as to whether or not he should continue in the race? If there's all of these outside factors that voters are deciding on that really have nothing to do with Biden, is his performance that much of a concern, and what can he do to regain trust from voters?
Yeah. First of all, let me say all of these journalists, pundits, commentators, political operatives who are putting pressure on Biden to withdraw have no track record whatsoever in predicting election results. And almost all of them were wrong in 2016 when I correctly predicted a Trump win. And yet they claim to know what the Democrats must do to win this election. And they are playing right into the hands of Donald Trump, who is reveling in this disarray among the Democrats. The keys to the White House, though, show the folly of bumping Biden off the ticket because Biden checks off two of my keys, incumbency and party contest. That means 6 more have to fall to predict the Democrats' defeat. You bump Biden and you don't have an obvious successor, you lose both those keys, and only 4 would have to fall. So presuming that these folks don't bump Biden now, what Biden needs to do is what FDR did when his health was in question. You know, in those days, having a disability was considered far more severe than it is today. When he ran in 1932, some of his advisors said, don't even campaign. You know, we don't want your disability out there in front of the country and they're going to think you can't govern. Imagine that. And FDR said, nuts, and ran one of the most vigorous campaigns in history. That's what Biden needs to do. Run one of the most vigorous, unscripted campaigns in history, hold lots of events, including press conferences, unscripted interviews, Oval Office addresses. But let me say, you know, in terms of debate skills, that's way down on what it takes to be a good president. Far more important is experience, judgment, values. And, you know, none of these critics who have been so critical of the debate have tied it to Biden's performance as president. He has achieved more domestic accomplishments than any president since the 1960s. It was Biden and Biden alone who brought together the coalition of the West that stopped Putin from conquering Ukraine. And now he is working very hard on a ceasefire and may well achieve it. All of that is so much more important. And all of this disarray plays right into the hands of Donald Trump. And I have to say, the media is fundamentally complicit in electing Donald Trump. All their focus has been on Biden. And that's legitimate. But they have totally ignored the fact that Donald Trump's performance in the debate posed far more of a threat to American democracy. He is lying and conning his way to the presidency. His whole performance was based on lies, one lie every minute and 20 seconds, and he has promised not to respect any of the traditions of American democracy, including being a dictator on day one, and every dictator in the history of the world who's been a dictator on day one has been a dictator forever. Why has the media ignored that and just focused on Biden's debate performance? There's an old saying, it's not just the evil people who wreak havoc on this world. It's the good people who don't do enough to stop them.
Now, I think Biden's incumbency, you know, while it does oftentimes give candidates a leg up, when we have over 70% of the country saying they believe he's not fit to run, and also the party contest being, you know, 4 years ago, the decision to not hold a primary, you know, I'm curious how that factors into the metrics here. Because this is something people can see play out in full time. We've had presidents definitely with questions about, you know, their debate performances, but also their cognitive functioning before. But in the age of social media, when we can all see it on our phones, I'm curious if we're handling that metric differently or if it's time for perhaps a new metric there. And a little bit curious about the position on the economy that so many Americans have. And if that played into I'm sure it did, the keys that you have, and in what way?
Look, the keys are based on history. They're very robust. As we mentioned, they go all the way back to 1860, when, you know, an agricultural economy didn't have poles, automobiles, jet planes. Women couldn't vote. Most blacks were enslaved. Asian Americans, Latin Americans. My ancestors from Eastern Europe hadn't even come here yet. But I'm not psychic Gene Dixon with a crystal ball. I'm not Speaker Mike Johnson, who claims the Almighty talks to him. And it's always possible, an event can be so unprecedented outside of the historical pattern to break that pattern. And we have two extraordinary unprecedented things today. The issue of Biden's age and competence, which the media has fixated on, and the fact that the other candidate is a convicted felon, 34 felony counts, who has openly threatened to destroy American democracy, which the media has largely ignored. Now, I do have a plan B. Let's say for a moment that the pressure on Joe Biden becomes so great that even though he doesn't want to, he has to withdraw. I don't think that's the right thing, but I do have a plan B to save the keys to the White House. That is, he resigns the presidency for the good of the country, which would put him in great contrast with Donald Trump, who only does things for the good of Trump. Kamala Harris would become president. She would preserve the incumbency key, and Biden could arrange it so all of his delegates would be instructed to support Harris, so you wouldn't get a party fight, and you would preserve the contest key as well. That is a plan B, not a plan A, but that's far better than Biden just stepping down from the race and letting the delegates brawl it out to see who would take on the nomination.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I know our viewers are going to find it interesting, the idea that the media is too soft on Trump. But Allan, we definitely appreciate it. Thanks for joining us here on Rising.
Anytime, you know where to find me. Oh, can I say one more thing?
No.
You want to follow the keys? My live show every Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern. You can find it at Allan Lichtman YouTube, ALLAN.
Okay, gotta go. Thank you.